for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network and KGRA, the Global Radio Alliance.
I need your help to get to the year 1985.
You're listening to Fade to Black with Jimmy Church on the Game Changer Network.
Welcome. Fade to Black. Bespoke radio for the masses. Yeah. How you doing? Today is Monday, December 16th, 2019. 350 days into the new year. Just 15 days left. We are live from a bunker somewhere in the middle of beautiful downtown Burbank, California. And I would like to welcome everybody listening all around the world, all across the United States. Hither and thither, to and fro, back and forth, up and down, east and west, north and south, far and near. This is Fade to Black for KJCR, the Game Changer Network, and KGRA, the planet. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. What is cracking, everybody? How you doing? Brand new week here on Fade to Black. Good to be with you. Tonight, very special first-time guest, John E. L. Tenney is here. I am so looking forward to this conversation tonight. John E. L. Tenney. Tomorrow night, another first-time guest, Matthew Mornian, joins us. Wednesday night, another first-time guest. It's our Star Trek, well, half a first-time guest. It's our Star Trek special event with Mark Cushman. He's got a new book out, actually two, and Vic Mignogna is here. Vic is back. Really looking forward to that. I haven't talked to Vic since I had him on Coast. Tonight, John E. L. Tenney is here. I want to remind everybody, tomorrow night, Matthew Mornian joins us. Wednesday night is our Star Trek special event with Mark Cushman and Vic Mignogna. Thursday night is our 6th anniversary show with open lines all night long. That'll be Thursday. All right, tonight is John E. L. Tenney. He is one of the most recognized and highly sought-after investigators of paranormal and occult phenomena, UFOs and high strangeness in all of America. Mr. Tenney has been actively involved in these fields of research for 3 decades. It's estimated that over the past 30 years, more than 100,000 people have attended one of John's signature weird lectures. Tenney's columns and articles have been printed in magazines and newspapers worldwide, including NBC, A&E, Fox, SyFy, the Detroit Free Press, and the Huffington Post, Men's Health, and the New York Times, and, of course, the Wall Street Journal. John has worked on numerous television shows, including Unsolved Mysteries, Sightings, Very Scary Stories, Paranormal State, The New Class, Ghost Stalkers, and Paranormal Lockdown, Kindred Spirits, and, of course, Hellier. His 2 websites are weirdlectures.com and realmoftheweird.com. Both of those links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, John E. L. Tenney. John, good evening, man. How are you?
Good. How you doing, Jimmy?
I'm doing fantastic, sir. And before we get started, you get the first-time guest disclaimer. Yeah, man. You ready?
Uh-oh. Go ahead.
John, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where that conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, but we're going to end as friends. There you go. See, that started years ago, John. I don't know how it started, and the audience just wouldn't let me stop every time we had a first-time guest. So there you go. Welcome to the program. And before I go through the list of obvious questions with you, we were talking before the show tonight, and you live in Michigan, and you've done a lot of research in Michigan on the paranormal and UFOs and things over the years. And it reminded me of, because my family's from there, okay? My mom and dad, my mom from Flint, my dad from Saginaw, or maybe it was the opposite, doesn't matter. That's where they met. My dad went to Western Michigan University, and that's where my family is from. And growing up at my grandparents' house in Holly, Michigan, the visits there were always strange. And my family told me that the house was haunted, and it was built in the 1800s, right? And I remember one day sitting on the couch there with my grandma and grandpa, and I heard a noise. And I looked, and my grandmother didn't even leave the sink, right? She's still washing dishes. But I heard it again, and I said, "Did you hear that?" My grandmother says, with her back turned to me, "That's our ghost." Right? and I was just thinking, okay. And nobody even, flinched. I kind of freaked out. But that's just the way it was for my family. And come to grow up as an adult, it's like that in houses across America. But what is it about Michigan that makes it such a strange place?
It is interesting to me growing up here, because after all these years of doing this, you hear about these confluences of environmental factors that may or may not involve paranormal or supernatural phenomena: running water, granite, just all of this kind of things. You don't know if there's anything really behind them. But then when you look at Michigan, like, we are this peninsula surrounded by water on top of a giant piece of granite. We have the largest living organism in the world, which is a mushroom that's about 300 miles in diameter that grows underneath us. We have more boats and planes disappear in the Great Lakes than in the Bermuda Triangle. We have Dogman. We have Bigfoot. We have haunted houses. The largest UFO sighting in 1966. Something strange is happening in Michigan.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And there's another, for me, along the west coast of Michigan on the lake there. One of the highest reported UFO areas in the country, and it goes along the west coast there, where UFO hunters don't necessarily speak about it first when they actually should. It seems like it goes on daily out there.
Yeah, there's something about Michigan, too. There's the people here for some reason. Maybe it's the weather. Maybe it's because it's frigidly cold for 8 months out of the year, but we also are very introverted, and we understand what's happening to us and don't feel the need to talk about it. So we have these huge clusters of sightings of creatures and monsters and UFOs and all this stuff. But in Michigan, it's good enough that you have the experience. I mean, that's the way I grew up. Like, your experience is good enough for you. You don't need to seek out the news and television shows. And I think that's something that's really interesting about my state.
Yeah, I think the perception of Michigan is Detroit. And I understand the reasons for that, right? I really do. But unless you drive across and up, to the UP, and drive across Michigan and know it. Michigan is basically remote, right?
Yeah, and people forget, like, I live just on the outskirts of downtown Detroit, like 11 miles outside of Detroit. If I were to drive to the topmost western side of Michigan in the UP, from where I'm at right now, it takes 11 hours. Like, we're a huge state.
It's big, and it's covered. It's remote. Anything can go down out there, from Bigfoot and UFO sightings and things that nobody else would ever know, because it is, quite frankly, not that populated.
Right. And like I said, we're somewhat introverted. We're nice and we're friendly, but also we don't want to talk about stuff if we don't want to talk about it.
Now, today, I mentioned in the opening, my little opening segment here tonight on the show, that today is December 16th, 2019. And it's 2 years to the day that the New York Times and Politico made the big announcement about the government's secret UFO program. And what that allowed was for what seemed like months and months of UFO coverage in the mainstream media and comments and interviews and videos and things. And it seemed that we were in the days of disclosure on the UFO subject. It's been 2 years since that announcement. What's your take on that? Do you feel that we were ever in the days of disclosure? Do things seem different with you about the UFO subject?
I mean, I catch a lot of flack from people because as a researcher, as a historian, one of the things I do is I like to look back at what we've experienced before. And when I told people to be cautious about this disclosure that seemed to be happening, I tried to point out to a lot of people, like, this has happened before, and don't get so excited about it that you lose track of who you are and what you're thinking about. When I was, in my 20s, and Larry King did a 3-hour live special with Stanton Friedman and ufologists doing UFOs are real, that was disclosure. We thought it was going to happen. And, 20 years before that, when Walter Cronkite went on the air and did a 2-hour-long special on UFOs being real, that was disclosure. Like, we have been here before. And I just always caution people, like, when these huge stories hit, you have to remember that a lot of what we experience in supernatural, paranormal, the ufological, the occult, is cyclical. It comes around to new generations. And it doesn't necessarily mean that this is going to be the time when the mysteries are revealed.
I agree with you. And it was about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. I'm hosting a panel at a conference. And we had about, it was at Contact in the Desert. We had about 2,000 people, right, in the big room there. It was packed. And a great panel, right? And I turned to the audience and I was hosting, and I had said, well, I don't need disclosure. I've seen too many things and I know that the phenomenon is real. And as I got those words out, John, you could hear boos coming from the audience. And they, no matter what, they are here because of a personal experience. They're here for emotional reasons, right? They're trying to figure out what's going on with a sighting or something else in their life, and they need real disclosure, and they will not accept anything less. And I understand the reaction that you get from people because I got the same one, and I don't think it's ever going to change.
No, I mean, if you're in this long enough and you think deeply and honestly about it enough, which a lot of your listeners do, disclosure is a personal thing. It actually happens to each of us individually, and it happens in a way that we can understand. Now, yes, we would like everybody to understand our experiences, everyone to understand that what we've experienced isn't singular. But the way that I think, at least at this moment, the way that disclosure happens is it happens individualistically. It happens to each of us in the way that we can perceive and understand it at the time that we're having that experience. And, it would be great if UFOs are going to land on the lawn of the White House, but there are still going to be people who doubt that. It's not how it seems to work.
With the skeptics out there who insist that we could be the only intelligent life in the entire universe, that we may have to accept that, and we hear that side of things, how is it possible that we could be the only intelligent life in the universe, which appears to be infinite now anyway, right? It's how do you approach that side of things where that is something that is, how do I say this correctly, being forced on people to consider, that we could be the only intelligent life out there.
Well, again, when I speak about people thinking honestly and openly and introspectively about their experience, and they say, well, perhaps we are the only thing, perhaps there's nothing more than us. For a long time, even on my journey through all of this weirdness, I had trouble reconciling that until I realized, like, there is a way that you can think about that, and that the way to think about that is, we often talk about interdimensionality or a multitude of dimensions and realities, and there's an infinite amount of realities and multi-universe hypotheses and things like that. Well, if you're going to accept that, then you have to accept that in all of those infinite amount of realities, there may be, or there has to be, a reality in which all of this is fake, and that we are the only thing that exists. And perhaps that is the reality that we currently are living in. That's one of the things that you have to understand, is that we really might be the one single universe in all of the dimensions and all of the realities and the infinitude of the cosmos. We might be in that one where all of this is fake.
And then a universe right next to us is densely right?
It's filled with, talking cats and talking tin cans, and everything's alive and everything is beautiful and perfect, with a multitude of life forms. But if you want to be skeptical, there is the possibility, if you believe in interdimensionality and a multitude of dimensions, that you have to perhaps consider the fact that we're in the one that has nothing but us.
Wouldn't that be depressing?
Oh, infinitely.
Yeah, wouldn't that be just depressing? Oh, man. I had a family member say to me, this is years ago, he said to me, nothing to do with this show, all right? But he said, if we found out, he was taking some classes in philosophy, stuff at the time. And so this is where this was coming from. But he said, if we found out that we were alone in the universe, it would be worse than finding out if we were not alone. And I said, what do you mean? He said, because if we're alone in the universe, there's no reason to save this planet. There's no reason to be friendly. We should just party. And I said, what? He said, because if we find out that we are not alone, then we have a reason to live. And it was such a heavy statement to me. It's like the opposite of what we've been told. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I talk about this sometimes at my lectures in the regard of, I have a lot of friends who are scientists, and they're materialistic and they're atheistic and they don't believe in any of this stuff, obviously. And they look at things through the eyes of science. And one of the conversations that I have with them repeatedly is, if the majority of people who are big capital S skeptics and capital A atheists, if they really believe that we are the only thing that exists in the universe, and that once we die, we're dead, and a couple billion years from now, the sun goes red giant and blows up and everything is destroyed and nothing mattered. If that's what they really honestly believe, that nothing matters at all, they would be heralding our march into the abyss right now. There's no reason for all of the scientist friends I have who believe that it's pointless to have children, and they all have children. Why would you want to persist? Why would you struggle and study the universe to find answers, knowing that those answers are only going to be lost when the Earth blows up a billion years from now?
Well, I've often said, and I mean this, a plane is getting ready to crash. The pilot has made the announcement, right? We're going down. You know who the most spiritual person on that plane is praying? Richard Dawkins, right?
Right.
That's the truth.
You have to cover your bases.
You got to cover your bases. What was the one event that sent you down this road? Was there an epiphany that happened?
I tell people, and it's as honest as I can be, I really don't have any secrets, and I really try and tell the truth, as brutal as it might be sometimes. I grew up a punk rock kid in the 80s. I hated people telling me what I could and couldn't think about, what was real and what wasn't real. And that really started me down the road, because I realized there was this wealth of people, whether it be occultists or paranormalists or witches or whatever, who had been thrown by the wayside by the denseness of society. And I was being told that they had no idea what they were talking about. And as I got a little bit older and started to deep dive into science and religion and the crossroads between them, I realized that honestly, no one knew what they were talking about. And so why should one aspect of my existence take precedent over the other?
Punk rock.
Yes.
I'm not going to let that go by, right? Who was your band?
The first band I was in was called Fried Vomit.
Right on.
We changed our name eventually to Degeneration. And we played with some pretty well-known bands. We opened for Social Distortion a couple times, and it was all very horrible.
Were you were you an East Coast punk guy or West Coast?
We kind of, being Michigan, we flirted with both of them. Like at one time, we liked, our influences were Minor Threat to the Dead Kennedys, to the Cramps, to the Misfits.
Misfits, good stuff. Your microphone's making a lot of noise, by the way.
I'm sorry, it started moving around a lot.
Yeah, that's what punk rock does. What instrument did you play? I just got to get this out of the way.
I screamed. I was the singer.
You were the singer?
I was, indeed.
What about Darby Crash, the Germs?
I love Darby. I mean, at that point in my life, I thought it was just fantastic that here you had this guy who had to super glue a microphone to his mouth because he couldn't hold it in front of him. I thought that was kind of great, even though later on I realized it was just because he was so drugged up.
Yeah, I was in the music. I was a musician too as well, and I got sidetracked from the hairband stuff into the punk world. And it was a pretty amazing time here in the mid 80s for that scene. And for those out there who would talk about Darby Crash and talk about the days of the Germs and Tex and the Horse Heads and some of the other things that were going on here in Los Angeles, and I was right on the fringe and hanging out with those folks, and it was a really amazing time, very creative. And so I was able to, I would combine both attitudes into my music, right?
Were you a metal guy, Jim?
Yeah, still am. Absolutely.
So I have to ask this question then.
Sure.
I know that I am the guest and I'm supposed to be answering questions, but I've always wondered this. Why is it that paranormal radio shows and television shows, why is it that metal seems to be the music that they play? Like I listen almost entirely to jazz and very kind of slow soundtracky music. But on television and radios, it's all guitar solos and heavy metal.
Yeah, like this show.
This program. Why is that? Where does that come from?
Yeah, it comes from the same things that you had just mentioned here. That punk rock made you, it wasn't necessarily a paranormal event, but it was your friends and you and music that drove you to certain beliefs in the chaser of knowledge. And I would say that it's the same thing for me because my foundation is music. I just happened, for you, it was the Dead Kennedys and the Misfits, right? For me, it was Van Halen and Black Sabbath, right, and Ozzy, but also the other strange part is one of my favorite bands of all time is PIL.
For sure,
and especially that first record and all of it, and the Sex Pistols. So I can appreciate both, but that's where the music comes from for me. And I would say that other hosts, other producers, I was, you know what? That's a great question. Let's stay right there for a second.
It's just our era.
My last TV series that I did for History Channel, right? Mm-hmm. So they built a set for me that replicated my bunker. I have 15 or 20 guitars in here that are on display, right? So they came here, they photographed the studio, and then they went and built me a set here in Los Angeles. And I show up at the set, and the producers there had been told by the executive producers, the team, bring all of your guitars from home. We're going to decorate Jimmy's set with various guitars. And I showed up there, and the amount of guitar... Anyway, so I looked around at the producers, and I was like, what's going on here? They're all into UFOs. They're all into conspiracy. They're all into these subjects. Some are members of MUFON, whatever. They all had guitars, and they all played. And we sat and talked music and guitars that day, and I was shocked by that. So it answers your question the way that I asked you, you know, and I think that's it. I think that we all have the same things for us growing up with the media.
That anti-establishment feeling. 100%.
Which takes me back to Tom DeLonge. All right, let's go back to Tom DeLonge for a second.
Right.
We gotta take a break in 6 minutes, 5 minutes. So this is the thing. Tom is a punk rock guy, Blink 182. And you understand the punk rules. And the punk rules are very simple. We're not going to side with the man. We are doing our own thing. Don't mix with the man or society in general. And Tom, who I talked about it with him on this program about the punk lifestyle and what that means to really be a real punk and anti-man. And now they've made like deals with the Army. Right, and he's working with the CIA, and he's got staff members of the Department of Defense. You know, the real man. Is he violating the punk code of ethics here?
I mean, it has always been interesting to me, right? Because we all have had, when we're in those scenes, those kind of underground scenes, like we all had those friends that were in it, and we didn't really know why. Like, I was a lower middle class kid. My family didn't have a lot of money. My dad was a mechanic. Like, and then you would have those kids whose dads were like high profile attorneys and lawyers and had like, and we couldn't figure out why they were in the scene. Like, were they just trying to grab onto something? And I feel, I mean, I don't know Tom. I've never talked to him, but like he does come from a somewhat wealthy background. His father, you know, was involved in the aerospace industry, and so there were some connections there readily made. And you know, I had the opportunity to join the Freemasons and didn't. My grandfather was a very high-ranking Mason, and I didn't because I didn't want to be told what to do. And Tom's a Freemason, and it just seems like to me. That wasn't the kind of punk rock ideology I was looking for from someone who's claiming to be punk rock. But I mean, you can't tell, this is the other part of punk rock, right? Like you can't tell someone that they're not, because then that starts judging, and that's not what punk rock is supposed to be. Right.
And then you have the wannabe, the fakers in punk rock, and
yeah, posers,
with the posers, and you know, just because you have a razor blade somewhere adorning your body or your clothes or whatever, a safety pin, right, doesn't make you part of this group. You have to earn it. And that's, they're always on the lookout for the posers in the punk world. And I kind of look at Tom. Could he have been just that, a poser? Because the punk rock world would never accept him hanging out with you know, the establishment of Washington, D.C.
Well, and in the UFO community, right? Like the UFO community has this very hard line about like never trust the government
ever.
And then you have someone come in who says like, okay, now you can trust the government because the government is talking to me. That's a big red flag, and just not in my punk rock ideals, but in just my researcher ideals. Like, I know that the government has disinformation agents. I know that they've spread disinformation throughout this community and other communities. And so all of a sudden I'm supposed to throw everything into the garbage simply because one person or two people are telling me to. Like, that just goes, it's antithetical to everything I've ever thought about.
And that's why you are John E. L. Tenney right there. Let's take a break. This is Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, John E. L. Tenney. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. You can follow John right there on Twitter. John E.L. Tenney. The links are up in Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. More of the conversation when we come back after this short break. Stay with us. All right. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, John E.L. Tenney is with us. Talking punk rock, man. I'm just all, like, I had to get up during the break and break out one of the guitars. You guys are watching me on the camera. See? I just can't help but play. The name of my punk band in the 80s, John, was The Foam Decoys.
We had my punk band. I talk about this to friends and stuff, but again, I don't have any secrets. The craziest thing that we ever did. Do you know who Gigi Allen is?
Yes. Oh,
yeah. We opened for Gigi the night before he went to prison for setting someone on fire.
Right. Well, that's that's pretty cool, actually.
It was frightening to be in the room with that man.
We could sit here and trade music stories all night. I'll say some of the craziest things. I'll say this: Johnny Thunders is he's playing here in Los Angeles. And, a friend had called up and said, okay, for whatever reason, I can't get into the details. We ended up attending one of his shows. And I stood in front of him watching him play and watching the audience freak out on him and his playing and his songwriting and his attitude. And the way that he presented himself. And me, I'm a gunslinger guitar player. And I stood back, and all I could think of is, that's how it's done right there. Right there, that's the real deal.
I was a guitar player in my later bands, but I was never a very good guitar player. I was a great... I was not a lead. I was not a lead guitarist. I was always a backup. But I mean, I was the lead guitarist because there was only one guitarist in my grunge band in the 90s. But I was never very good at soloing. No noodling on my behalf. Right.
Well, okay. I'll do this. I'll say this one story. Okay, Killer Kane, right? Bass player, New York Dolls. I'm with Killer. Did an interview with him. And we are at the Whiskey, and we're upstairs hanging out. And there was a photographer there that was with us. And we take a group picture. And Arthur Killer Kane's no longer with us, right? But we take this group picture. And this boyfriend and this girl, that were at the end of this thing, somebody turned around and thought it would be funny for this picture to pour a drink on Arthur's head. And he was like 6'4", right? He was a big boy. He's a big, tall guy. And I feel my arm is around Arthur. His arm is around me. And I feel the drink go down my arm. And I look and I see the hand. And all I thought to myself was, why would you do that? I stood back and I watched Arthur punch this guy in a split second. He didn't think twice. He just hauled off this guy who was out cold, and we just went back to the evening. But again, I just thought to myself, that's how you do it, right there. He is the real deal. But anyway, we could trade these stories all night. Let's get to Hellier. I just completed, I watched season 2 twice now. I've watched season 1 probably the same, probably 2 or 3 times. And coming off of season 1, which was such a head scratcher, just thinking about how all of this series of synchronicities was playing out. And it was amazing to watch. And then you watch season 2. And all I can think about is the ability of Greg and Dana and the team there to have the energy to stay focused and follow these synchronicities, of which are astoundingly coincidental, right? I mean, at a level that I can't put my finger on. I just want your overall assessment of that statement. Because
it's utterly amazing. I mean, watching what Greg and Dana and the team, Carl and Connor and Tyler have been able to do is really amazing, because they have opened up a myriad of shells for people to look inside of. And this is, something that I've tried to do for 30 years, which is trying to get people to think slightly stranger about their strange experiences that their people are having personally. And for them to be able to do it in such a crystalline, perfect way is amazing to me, because, well, first of all, you said coincidence. A lot of people, I talk about this too at my lectures, the dictionary definition of a coincidence, when a skeptic or an atheist or a materialist tells you, oh, it's just coincidence. The dictionary definition of a coincidence are seemingly unrelated events which for no seemingly discernible reason seem to be related. So, I mean, what a kind of bull crap answer. I mean, it means that no one understands why they're happening. And so to be able to track them down and follow them, or to be able to find purpose and meaning in these things that are seemingly unrelated but still related, is amazing. And to make that palatable to a larger audience is, for me, just literally magic.
Now, no kidding. And you've helped and assisted with them, and I know that when the scene with you guys in Detroit, right? When the reveal of the numbers is happening, that's one thing. And I don't want to do any spoilers on this show. Okay, so we'll speak in generalities here. But for me, and I said this to Greg and Dana last week, for me, the numbers part of it and what Connor did was great. And it was seeing this, but that to me was a small part of what was going on there. It was the connection to Crowley. It was the other references into things, again, that were seemingly unrelated. Suddenly, those numbers were connected, 3 and 9 and 418. I don't want to give anything away. But to see how those were connected into a seemingly unrelated series of things from our history was mind-blowing. And I sat there and just thought, how can this all be happening? But it wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so I have told them, even when they were filming the first season, I've told them specifically to kind of keep me out of it, because I have been on journeys like this before, and throughout the past 30 years, there have been times when I have kind of spiraled, and there are other researchers before me, whether it's Morris K. Jessup or Albert Bender. There's a litany of people who have lost their minds trying to do what the team in Hellier is doing. And I have been to those edges before, and it's not very comfortable, and I really don't like it. So I have told them purposefully, only call me when you need me. And so there was, in the first season of Hellier, they called me at like 3:00 in the morning, and I answered and told them that, like, you will lose your mind if you spiral in a certain manner. And so I also think that people forget too, if they're watching season 2 of Hellier, that episode where I'm at a hotel in Detroit and they're talking to me, that was 2 months ago. That was in September is when they came to Detroit. So, I mean, you're almost watching this stuff in real time. And I had no idea of the numbers. I had no idea what they were, because I had told them specifically to keep me out of the loop. And so when Connor called me, he was like, I want some help with this. I need some perspective on it. I looked at it as if I were sending a message to a ghost hunter who had no idea of what the Kabbalah is and what Thelemites are and how to do numerology. How would I send them numbers that they could easily understand? And as soon as I looked at it through that lens, as soon as I looked at it through the eyes of Greg 6 years ago, not knowing anything about numbers and how numerology works and how, Thelema works and stuff like that, it fell immediately into place for me. And I was like, oh, this is a direction they need to look in.
It's kind of fun, isn't it, to be the old guy in the room for a minute? If you know what I mean.
It is to a certain degree, yes.
Because they've got the energy. They're still in a world of wonder, right? They're out there getting it done, but they don't understand also how crazy it can possibly get. And, I'm 56. I'm not young anymore, but I can appreciate what they're going through and the fact that they have the tenacity to keep their foot on the gas, because this has gone and could still go in crazy directions, in very disturbing directions very, very quickly.
Well, and I think it's beautiful, too, that they are very open and willing and honestly portraying themselves in much of both of seasons, saying that they don't know and saying they don't understand. That's a very beautiful thing to me, because we now live in a world where, whether you're watching television shows or listening to talk radio shows or watching a streaming series, you have experts on, and they're supposed to provide you with the answer, with the definitive conclusion. And I think it's so wonderful. All of us know inherently in our own being that we don't know. And that's the reason that we quest down these strange roads. And so to watch a group of people go through an experience wholeheartedly and full speed ahead, but at the same time having Dana say stuff like, well, this isn't in my wheelhouse, I don't know. Having Greg saying, I don't know what that means. What does that word mean? Like, that's a beautiful thing for our community to see.
The string of numbers, again, no spoilers, but the string of numbers, in your estimation, what would be the odds of those numbers being chance while being connected to dozens of situations that played out right there in that hotel room? What are the odds that those numbers can fit conveniently into all of these variables?
It's very, very odd. So I did, Connor gave me the numbers 3 days before people see what they see in Hellier. And so the first thing I did, aside from doing very simple numerology on it, looking at it through what I thought would have been Greg's eyes or someone's eyes who didn't understand all of the numerical occultism behind it. The first thing I did was I started doing random number generation to see if I could get that kind of reoccurrence in the number systems. And I sat for an entire day with a random number generator and just using house numbers and license plate numbers, writing them down, and then trying to figure out, can they be added and subtracted this way? And it just didn't happen. Like, this seemed very definitive and very purposeful.
The other parts of Hellier, which we've talked about, all of these different angles, but for me, we can't lose sight of this entire journey came from an anonymous email, a random email when he was a teenager, right? a ghost hunting team of kids has put them on this journey. Is it possible that there is one person that is out there guiding them for maybe an initiation? Maybe it's some kind of a spell, or it's a task that needs to be completed for this individual, and they're using this group to do this. Is it that, or is it just nature? Is this the way that the universe works, and we need to follow synchronicities?
I have a lot of ideas that the universe tries to expose itself to all of us in the ways that we can understand it, and that many people just disregard them. Many people are too busy, and understandably, paying bills, going about their life, and perhaps only realize the significance of certain objects and occurrences when it's too late. And I think that Hellier is a very beautiful thing in that you're seeing people who are recognizing that something strange is happening and they're going to engage it now. They're not going to wait for it. They're going to experience. And I think if the cosmos, if the universe has ever showed us anything, if we can draw any inference from just looking at reality, it's that reality loves movement, it loves change, it loves action, it loves motion. It seems to dislike stagnation. And if Hellier does anything at all, it shows people to engage with the universe and engage with weirdness. And when you do, the universe engages you back.
What do we do, we and you, with those synchronicities? I mean, they happen to all of us daily. Did you have a synchronicity today?
I did have a synchronicity
right.
today. Yeah, absolutely. And I had the synchronicity I had was I woke up and my alarm clock radio, I'm an old man, so I have an alarm clock radio. It woke up and it was playing Mr. Blue Sky by ELO is the song that I woke up to. And so I went about my day just thinking about that because it was in my head because it was the first thing I heard when I woke up. And then I got in my car. I didn't want to. I had to go and run an errand that I didn't want to do. I moved my parents in with me this year, so it's been a difficult year readjusting to that change. And I was doing some stuff I didn't want to do or think that I needed to do. And I was pulled up into a grocery store, and I got out of my car, and I started humming Mr. Blue Sky. And as I walked into the grocery store, the chorus to Mr. Blue Sky began to play in the grocery store, and I realized, okay, I'm on track. It's all right. You don't be mad. You're not doing something that you don't want to do. You just don't recognize that the universe is pushing you in a direction.
And what do you do with that? You know, because so many
you feel relief,
right?
You feel relief. You know that there's meaning where there seems to be none, and that's why a lot of us are engaged in supernatural, paranormal, occultism. There's meaning.
Is there a connection in all that there is? And I don't want to ask a generalized question, but when I look at science and I look at physics and I look at the universe and question all of the science that is out there, time travel and parallel worlds and interdimensionality and the multiverse, all of these things are starting to mesh and merge right in front of us, which is telling me that it was all connected from the beginning.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the message. Like, it's hard for us to understand as human beings that the world isn't dualism. It's very comforting for us to think about right and wrong, hot and cold, left and right, black and white, day and night, like that there are opposites. But the reality is that there are an infinitude of choices and possibilities. And that is what makes solidity. And I know that sounds paradoxical, and I sometimes will tell people, it's hard for us to understand those paradoxes because we've been so conformed into thinking about duality. But even human beings, the fact that each one of us is a different creature, that we are unique in our design, that's the thing that we have in common. Our commonality is that we are different. That's how strange this is to live in a non-dualistic world.
Is there a control element with that knowledge? In that is there an organized institution out there to keep that knowledge and understanding from us, where it seems that the ancients of no matter the culture did understand this, and somewhere along the line they pulled it away from us?
I think so. I mean, there absolutely is power in keeping us divided. The idea that, when you look at European and paintings of the pyramids being built, right? Or you read or watch the Ten Commandments, like there are slaves building the pyramids. But if you talk to historians, they'll tell you that the pyramids were built where there were no slaves. They were built out of a reverence and a worship of the gods in the universe, that people were working together to accomplish that task. And then you even have a more modern version saying, well, people back then, there's no way they could have possibly built that stuff without extraterrestrial help. As if the people in the past working together who had a reverence for the universe and the weirdness of their reality we're somehow less than us because we have Nike and iPhones.
What's the advantage of the divide and conquer and suppression of knowledge? I mean, if all of this secrecy exists, and I believe that it does, but in the end, what's the advantage? Why would they do it?
I think it's because people have especially people in power and in control, because we don't know, because I think that life is supposed to be an endless mystery. And because these people who have control and power, whether it be through families or corporations, government, political entities, whatever you have, because they're unsure, because they haven't done self-reflection, because they're not introverted, because they don't engage the strange, they are convinced that right now is all that exists. And so they need to acquire as much wealth and power and money as possible so that they can be ahead of everyone else. I really do think that that's probably their only goal.
And does it all end in money as well? I mean, the power side of it, is it greed and the accumulation of wealth that forces them to suppress the knowledge? And again, this isn't a general kind of comment or question, but it seems like everything is connected, whether it is the banking system and wars and knowledge and college. But as long as they can control all of that, they win. And it seems like, as it's the internet, it seems like that today we are able to collect this knowledge that in the past they had control of. But now we have this freedom to go and research this, and this is what we're finding out now.
Yeah, it's very strange to me that people want to acquire. I mean, yes, of course, everyone wants to have the things that would make them happy, and for some reason they believe that is wealth and stuff. That has always seemed very strange to me. Again, maybe that's just because I grew up a very lower middle class kid and I didn't need very much to be happy. But the idea that physical material goods are the prime driver is so bizarre and frustrating to me when you realize that these people, the ones that seem to be in control or have the most material power and wealth, they don't engage the strange. They don't engage weirdness. They are completely focused on the materialism of right now. And I think there's power in living in a moment and not living in the past or living in the future. But when that power is focused toward only the gain and the pushing of a single self forward or a single family forward, I think that's where some corruption comes in. And that's where we fall under the illusion that that's what we want.
The other day, it was 2 days ago, a big headline here in Los Angeles, the Beverly Hillbillies mansion was just sold, right? And it's a ridiculous house, by the way. It's just ridiculous. Sold it for like $150 million. And most expensive property in California history, right? And I thought to myself, that's insanity. And then later on in the article, which I knew about this, I spoke about it last year, the most expensive property in the United States was sold last year in New York City. It was a hedge fund guy, $250 million. Right? And I had to just stop and think, who has that kind of money where you are going to purchase a piece of property for $250 million? What kind of wealth are we looking at here? $250 million. Yeah, go ahead.
It's very strange. I was just going to say, it's very strange to me when I was, again, we're all the culmination of our personal experiences. When I was a teenager, my mother did elder care, and so I helped her with doing elder care, and I saw a lot of people in their last days before they passed away, rich and poor. And the one thing that was consistent between rich and poor was that they wanted more time to experience the universe. They wanted more time to swim and laugh and walk in the forest and walk on the ground. They didn't want more shoes. They didn't want more buildings, and they didn't want more houses. And there were some of my mom's clients were wealthy. That's not what they would talk to us about. They talked to us about, they wanted someone to hold their hand a little longer. They wanted to ask someone questions. Like, these are the things that we should be doing our entire lives, not the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, and we need to take a break right here. And as I was reading that a couple of days ago, I thought to myself, here I am, 56, and am I going to buy another home? How many years are left? That stuff's not important to me. You know what's important to me is my friends and my family and just trying to figure things out and knowledge. That's what's important to me. Would I go and have the quest of a $250 million home? The answer is I would not. Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, John E. L. Tenney. Tomorrow night, right here, is Matthew Mornian, and then Wednesday night is our Star Trek special event with Mark Cushman and Vic Minogna. Thursday night is Fader night, open lines all night long. I'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. You can follow John at John E. L. Tenney right there on Twitter. Hashtag F2B is the sandbox. You can engage conversation there. Hashtag F2BQ is Fade to Black questions. And, of course, we have 2 chat rooms that are open. John, speaking about how things are connected, back in the 2000s, we saw the amazing and rapid rise of paranormal ghost hunting groups and television programming. I don't know what the list is now. I don't know how many shows are on, but they are certainly everywhere. What do you think is ultimately driving this fascination into ghost and the paranormal today?
There's always, for me, it's interesting because, I started as a researcher for Unsolved Mysteries in the 90s. And if you would have told me that 10 years later there would be dozens upon dozens of ghost shows on television, I would have thought that you were completely insane. There's no way anybody would ever want to watch that. Even though people have interests in paranormal phenomena, I didn't think that people would cozy up on the couch an hour to even watch one, much less 5 or 10 or 12. But there is an inborn, kind of instinctual quest that we're all on. I don't know how deep it goes for most people, but there is a love of the unknown in everyone, and I think that paranormal shows kind of feed that. I think they do some good, but I think they do some harm at the same time. I think that they don't allow people to see exactly what paranormal research is like, that you don't get to really deep dive the research. It doesn't make for good television producers and directors will tell you that, that. But, they have to have popping points. They have to be driven by narratives. You have to have an end goal. There has to be some kind of horrible thing that's going to happen or some great reveal. And that, I feel, turns a lot of people off when they actually start to investigate paranormal phenomena. They realize how slight and how strange it is, that it's sometimes infinitesimal. It's not someone scratching you on the back or a demon possessing you. Sometimes it is a song on the radio. Sometimes it is a butterfly landing on your shoulder. Sometimes it is you can't find your shoe. Like, that's the way that the paranormal works. Sometimes, it seems, to a lot of us. if you're not engaging it fully. If you engage it fully, obviously it can get stranger and stranger. But when people watch television shows, they get that kind of jump scare because people also love horror movies. You probably know, as well as a lot of your listeners, that paranormal television shows appeal to a wide crowd, but not necessarily all of them are interested in hunting for ghosts. The most watched ghost show on television right now, I mean, I don't have any secrets and I try and talk about the things I know, but the most watched television show that's paranormal based on television has like 1.4 million viewers. And I would estimate that probably half of that are people who just like to be scared. And so then you're down to about 500,000 people who are actually interested in ghosts. That's not a huge community.
But what is, okay, and based on those numbers, and we're going to stay right here, CNN, or Fox, right now, as you and I are speaking, have a viewership of around 500,000 people.
Right.
And then you could have a ghost program or Ancient Aliens with 1 million and a half. And that says a lot. And certainly the advertisers and the corporations out there recognize this too. This is not some passing event. This is something real with society.
But those 500,000 viewers that CNN might have, or MSNBC might have, or that Fox might have, there are 24 hours a day, half a dozen, if not more, news channels on that get those ratings. When you have one show on Friday that gets 300 or 400,000 viewers, and then you half those 300 or 400,000 viewers, now you're only down to 100,000 listeners. It's not that huge of a fan base. It's not that huge of a target audience. And yet somehow someone knows that that's going to do better than, the 25th season of The Kardashians. And make no mistake, the Kardashians have already been to Area 51 and investigated UFOs. That was an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And this is another strange part about that, because you've been doing paranormal television for a long time, and so have I. In that it's not one show, right? It's not Ghost Adventures, and it's not just Ancient Aliens. Now on multiple networks, it's 24 hours a day. And I would have never thought that this day would come, but it is certainly here.
I'm still surprised that there's not a dedicated paranormal television channel.
Yeah, it's coming to your programming in a couple of weeks. It's right around the corner. The viewing of an actual ghost for an individual, like for say somebody like myself, or even a professional ghost hunter yourself, it must be rare. And when we look at if somebody is seeing a real bona fide ghost every single day, we've got some issues we need to work out. But for you, when we look at the classic definition of a ghost, how many have you seen?
So this is, I've written about this and I speak about this throughout my life, 30 years of actively investigating this stuff. I've seen 3 things that could have been UFOs. I've seen an exorcism, which seemed to be something larger than just a physical experience, and maybe 10 things that could have been ghosts in 30 years. So it does, at least for me, I mean, it's not huge. It doesn't happen all that often. Even when it comes to things like doing EVP sessions. I mean, I've done literally tens of thousands of EVP sessions and probably only have 50 or 100 recordings that I think are worth anything. And this is why I write up and talk about so much that a person's unique individual experience is enough. You don't have to be abducted from aliens every week. You don't have to see a ghost every week. You don't have to have pictures of thousands of orbs every 2 days. You don't need to see a UFO every weekend over your house. One experience is good enough, because in this community, and your listeners know as well, someone might have a valid experience, and once that experience is over and they want more, and it doesn't come, that's when people start to fabricate. And then as soon as they do fabricate, or as soon as they start to misidentify things because they want more of the experience and it's not happening, everything that they've ever experienced is called into question. The podcast that I do, which is called Realm of the Weird, you plugged the website at the beginning, realmoftheweird.com. Mm-hmm. Those are the 13 weirdest experiences that I've had. And people want me to do more episodes. And I tell people all the time, I will do more episodes when something else weird happens to me. I haven't done an episode of Realm of the Weird in like 2 or 3 years, maybe even 4 years, because when I deem something weird enough to do an episode about, I'll do it. But I'm not going to make something up because those initial experiences are enough.
I've only seen one thing that I would call a ghost. It's only happened once. Had a couple of strange little things, where I've heard things, and a door has opened when it shouldn't have, and things like that. But only once in my 56 years have I seen one thing, but it scared the crap out of me. I'll say that for sure, because I still don't have the answers for that. And out of those 13 episodes of Realm of the Weird, what's the one ghost story there that you would point to somebody and say, see, this, you need to check this out because this is the one that really stands out?
I went to a paranormal convention over a decade ago, and while I was at that paranormal convention, someone hit my car, and so my car needed to be repaired, and it was going to take about a week. So I had to stay in this hotel by myself. The convention was over. It was only, a 2-day convention. I had to be there by myself for 5 or 6 days. I'm in this huge hotel, 200 rooms. I'm the only person checked in. It's the middle of winter, and I didn't have a car, so I had to walk to a diner to have lunch and dinner. And I went there twice. And when my car was repaired, I thought I would go back and have one last meal before I drove home. I was in Illinois at the time. And I drove around for about 3 hours looking for the diner, and I couldn't find it. And that diner actually never existed. Now in the past 10 years, I've, obviously researched it and looked and used Google Maps and asked people in the area and asked people who have lived there. And I ate at a place that didn't exist. And that is truly probably the weirdest thing that ever happened.
I love that. Not only do I know that it happened, I had something very similar. Very, very similar. And I'm almost uncomfortable. I'll tell you the short version of it. This audience has heard the story too many times. But this is what happened. I was driving about a mile from my parents' home in Indianapolis, and I'm driving by myself down a road that I've driven hundreds of times, and I see off to my left a house for rent, and it had a pool in the front yard, and it was a little tiny white house, and it had a for rent sign on it, and I thought, wow, that's cool. I was like 18, 19 years old. There's the summer party pad right there. Let's rent this sucker. And I turned my car around, went back, parked, walked up, looked in the front window, and I got all excited. And next to the house was a chain link fence. And on the other side of the chain link fence was a little family plot. I'm going to say like 5, maybe 8 gravestones were there in the trees, a little clearing. And I thought to myself, who cares? House is too cool, right? In-ground pool. This is happening. I don't care. I can deal with the little graveyard next door. So I jump in my car, go back to my apartment, call my friends, get everybody together. We got to go. I got to show you this house. It's for rent. Get everybody in the car. This is all within our neighborhood, right? Drive back. It's gone. The house isn't there. And we drive up and down the street. I'm like, it was right here. The house was right here.
Now, I'll tell you something that's really weird that you're bringing that up, because I just had this conversation earlier this week on Twitter with someone. Someone asked me about, obviously, all your listeners and you and I, we all talk about the Mandela effect, right?
Right.
And so I had this conversation earlier, which was, I have a distinct memory. And there's actually a blog post about it on weirdlectures.com from about 8 years ago. There used to be, I remember this from 20 years ago, there actually used to be something called transient environment phenomena, which was houses and buildings vanishing, disappearing, appearing, and disappearing. And the paranormal community talked about it all the time. And as soon as the Mandela effect hit public consciousness, I think my article on Weird Lectures is the only mention of transient environment phenomena on the internet. All of a sudden, no one remembers it but me. But paranormalists used to talk about it all the time. The fact that you could grow up in a city, you could drive down a road over and over and over again, and then sometimes you would drive down it and see a building that you never saw before. Or you'd see a barn disappear out of a field that you had driven past for 30 years. And now that phenomena isn't even remembered by people.
When we discuss things like this, is it because we are on the verge of science proving these things? I mean, the Mandela effect, 100 million people can't be crazy, right? We have to look at it in those terms. There's something else that is going on here. And I keep going back to things like quantum mechanics, quantum computing, qubits, and the way that entanglement actually works, and the possibility of parallel worlds and the existence of this. Would this help explain ghosts or Bigfoot or cryptozoology or disappearing houses?
I mean, I think so. Again, one of the things that I've tried to talk about for 30 years is that when you have the cryptozoological community, the UFO community, the ghost community, the occult community, they don't like to interact with each other. And I've always found that very frustrating, because it's like being very interested in a single tentacle of an octopus. Like, all of them seem to be connected by something, but no one is investigating the thing that they're all connected to. And so I really do think that when you study Bigfoot, and you study UFOs, there should be a crossover area. I mean, I know for a fact, MUFON at one of their kind of conference calls, they had to sit down and tell members, like, we're not going to take Bigfoot stories anymore. We want to be taken seriously, so we're not going to talk about Bigfoot stories anymore. And someone on the call said, well, what happens if someone sees a UFO and Bigfoot gets out of it? They said, well, just report the UFO, don't report the Bigfoot. And that does a disservice to the entire community, because we don't see the overlap. We don't see how wide and weird the world might possibly be, or reality, our seemingly shared reality, might absolutely be. And to your point of can millions of people be crazy? There was you mentioned Richard Dawkins earlier in the conversation. Richard Dawkins was having a debate with Rupert Sheldrake. For your listeners, I'm sure they know Rupert Sheldrake. He studies morphogenic fields. He believes in telepathy. Dogs that know when their owners are coming home is pretty much how he's mostly recognized. But Dawkins was having a conversation with Sheldrake on stage. And Dawkins threw that skeptic kind of trope at Sheldrake, where Sheldrake was talking about paranormal experiences. And Dawkins turns around and says to him, "You're making an outrageous claim. I demand, extreme proof," which is something that skeptics will say all of the time. Your outrageous claims demand outrageous proof, something to that akin. And Sheldrake turns around and looks at Dawkins, almost floored by that idea. And Sheldrake says to him, "You're telling this crowd that millions of people for thousands of years have been wrong about their own personal experience. Like, that's an outrageous claim. Do you have any outrageous proof to prove that your claim is true?"
I've seen that debate, that conversation, dozens of times. Dozens. I watch it in fascination. This is the way I look at this, John, and I don't want to come off as cocky or over self-confident or egoed out. I don't. But I would eat Richard Dawkins' lunch. Okay? And there's a lot of reasons for that. His smugness and his for somebody that's an atheist, he has a definite godlike persona. And it's not that part that angers me. It's that if you are a true scientist and you're an educated guy that is writing and doing this kind of work, then you have to have an open mind and question everything. You can't go the opposite road. You cannot close it down and say that I'm right and everybody else is wrong, because that's not what science is based on. Science is based on a series of corrections. And you need to be out there correcting things and improving and moving forward. And that's Dawkins' fault if he has one.
Absolutely. Science is not supposed to be dogmatic. As a matter of fact, if you talk to scientists and materialists and atheists, one of the things they will tell you is, well, we had to move away from the priest caste, who were the only people who could read, and so they were the only people who knew what the Bible said, and they told people that's how they kept people under control. Only a certain amount of people could read the books, and so only a certain amount of people had the truth. And so science has liberated us. And yet we've come to a point where there are only 1,500 theoretical physicists in the entire world who understand the math in the books. And those people are the only ones who can know how to read the books. And they're the only ones that tell us what is real and what isn't real. Science has created its own priest caste. And science, to a very large degree, has become the dogma that it was always fighting.
And I spoke about this last week on the show. And I love bringing physicists on, and we always have great conversations. But one thing is true. They are the ones that understand the math. I cannot look at that stuff and figure it out, right?
Right.
And so we are dependent on their orating skills to explain to us what the math means. And it's nothing more than that. And we have to believe what they are saying. And Brian Greene, who I really enjoy, Brian Greene said in this one presentation, an audience member stood up, question and answer thing, and said, I've been studying physics and I've been reading your books. And Brian Greene cuts him off and says, you're not studying physics. There's nothing in my books that can teach you anything. My books are just me explaining what I want you to know. Right?
Yeah.
I was like, it was a terrifying statement. The audience laughed. I was taken aback. I thought, that's exactly right. I don't understand the numbers, and I never will. They are giving us the theatrics of what the numbers are, and we don't have a choice but to take it.
And to me, the thing that to come to a very kind of just my personal views on stuff. Of course, I'm interested in science, and I'm interested in the physics of the universe and how the universe may or may not work. That's all very interesting to me. And I would love to sit down, and I have, with scientists, whether they're neurobiologists or physicists or theoretical physicists, and hash out UFOs and ghosts and Bigfoot. It's all very interesting to me. But at the end of the day, if there is no such thing as ghosts, if there's no such thing as UFOs, if there's no such, honestly, to your whole listenership, if none of it is real, if all it is, if all those experiences are a means and a mechanism for us to talk to and interact with each other and speak to each other deeply and honestly about how we feel about our place in the universe, it's far more important to me than science.
And the fact that we are, in a very short time, by the way, we've had like maybe 300 years of real actual science and 100 years of real technology with electricity and everything else. If we are able to sit and look out at the universe and ask these questions, we are in a great place.
Absolutely.
Right? I think that's the biggest part of all. I mean, it's the fact that this, I don't know how many pounds of gray sludge that we have in our heads, but we are able to use that and engage in this conversation that we are having right now. That is the biggest mystery of all. I mean, how is that possible?
For real. And there's no real good evidence that it's even happening. I could just be sitting alone by myself right now, imagining all of this.
Let's take a break right here. Our guest tonight, John E. L. Tenney. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. We're going to pick up right where we are leaving off when we come back after this short break on the Game Changer Network and KGRA, The Planet. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, John E.L. Tenney. What a great conversation. And I want to continue, actually, where we left off right before the break, which is when we're talking about physics, consciousness, and what makes us us, and trying to figure that part out. Is it connected directly to what a ghost is or may be in these spirits? How do you explain the phenomena?
I mean, I don't try to explain. I mean, I just have a lot of ideas, right? And I think I've told people, my friends know this, and people who have seen me lecture know this. If anything persists of me after my biology goes away, I'm probably not going to stick around here and whisper into people's digital recorders. If I'm no longer locked into the biology of moving forward through this seeming arrow of time in these three dimensions, if I'm set loose upon reality in a non-corporeal form, I'm going to be sitting in the heart of the sun. I'm going to be light years away in different galaxies. And so when it comes to seeing ghosts that seem to take on human form or familiar form to us, I have to wonder, what in the myriad of existence and possibilities are those things? I think that the most commonly seen ghosts, if you want to call them for lack of a better word, the most commonly seen ghosts are familiar spirits. There are people, loved ones who have passed away, grandma, grandpa. Grandma's wearing her favorite white dress, grandpa's wearing his fishing boots. I think that if non-corporeal, energetic-only entities exist and they retain some type of idea of who they are, if they do continue to persist in their consciousness and their identity, I think that they would not appear outside to us. Vision happens because, there's light and shade and shadow bouncing off of objects and going into our eyes, where it's reconstructed by our brain. And that takes a lot of energy to make something that would bounce light and shape and shadow. Mm-hmm. If someone who loved us wanted to contact us, I think they'd do something far more intimate and something more simple for them, which is fire off a single visual synapse in our brain, one that they would contact and communicate accurately with that person. They'd look through our memories. Grandpa would find that image of himself that we want to remember and flip that switch, and then Grandpa is there in front of us with his fishing boots on, and Grandma's in her favorite dress. I think in those instances, that's maybe how spirits or entities are communicating with us.
And what would explain the classic ghost?
So, I mean, that's the other thing, too, is I feel like human beings probably have archetypes within our brains. We probably have a silhouette of a man or a human being in there, either from a movie or looking at our own shadow. And so when a spirit is trying to show itself to us, but it doesn't have an accurate descriptor, an accurate visual image of itself, it goes kind of that default setting. And then we see a woman in white, or we see a shadow person, or we see a little child wearing a white dressing gown. I mean, these are all images that are already stored in our heads, and so they just trigger one that looks somewhat like them.
And then we have the electronic side of the phenomena. You mentioned EVPs. FLIR, infrared imaging, capturing these humanoid figures. What would that be if our eyes aren't involved with this and now it's an electronic phenomena?
Well, that's the other thing too, right? Like, I don't discount that there are beings or entities that can manifest them in outer reality that we can see. My ideas about the nature of this seemingly shared reality is that all these possibilities are open. And so there are, of course, beings that can appear and be photographed and be seen outside of our visual recollection centers in our brain. And that's something to be investigated. When you talk about EVPs, and I think the community does this as a whole, we throw kind of umbrella terms on stuff. If you do an EVP session and you have a digital recorder and you get a voice, that's a certain phenomenon. If you have an analog recorder and get a voice, that's different from your digital recording. A digital recorder and an analog recorder record sounds in completely different ways, which means you've recorded two different phenomena, just according to the equipment that you're using. But we say it's all one thing. And that, I think, does the entire community a disservice.
How would a spirit do the conversion into the digital realm? In other words, everything's quiet, everything is cool, but you get the recording of, get out, whatever it is.
Well, how does a spirit make any voice at all? I mean, I make a voice because I have lungs and a larynx and a throat and I lips and tongue, and I can shape the words and push air and make waves that are picked up by ears. But ghosts don't have, as far as we know, lungs. They don't have a physical mechanism for moving wind to make waves that we would hear. And so the phenomena of recording it at all is super interesting. And then if you hear it but don't record it, that's a different phenomena. If you record it but don't hear it, that's a different phenomena. A digital recorder has a chipset inside of it that reconstructs sound based on air pressure changes, where an analog tape records the actual movement of waves through the air through an electromagnet on a ferromagnetic tape. So, when we say EVP, what are we talking about? Because there's a multitude of even EVPs.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with it, and the only way I can wrap my mind around it, this is my musician, producer, engineer side of it, is that there must be, and it must take a lot of effort if you're a spirit, but electromagnetic interference going through the digital equipment. I'm not talking about analog, and you're absolutely right in making the definition between the two and defining them. But it must be an electric phenomenon that we can't see that is occurring, and it's an accident. They don't know, right? They don't know it's digital equipment. Right. They're just trying to make the effort of speaking, and they don't know how to do it. And this is done in the electric universe. And the phenomena happens to be going and getting captured on digital recorders.
Right. And we're not even taking into account the fact that we might be in play in their responses. They may be using the electricity or the electromagnetic fields and biochemistry of us to create those sounds. They might be using the energy coming off of our bodies as a way to, has anyone done an in-depth study of, do EVP recordings on digital recorders work better if you're holding it in your hand? That's something someone should have done 20 years ago. If it's connected, if someone's holding the recorder, if it's set on a table. If it's set on a table and someone is touching the table, do you have a better chance of getting it? Because we might be the antenna that they're using.
And there might be another aspect to this. I want to pick your brain. That it's not a phenomena at all. It is it's just merely a parallel world. That's it. And they are existing in it, and we can't see them any more than they can see us or interact with us. And we may be bleeding in to their world and have a cross of frequencies, and they may be experiencing the same thing with us appearing once in a while and freaking them out.
Yeah, I had a client, I tell this story at my lectures. I had a client many years ago whose grandmother had passed away, and so she went to her grandmother's house to do a final check before it was sold. And she walked in the front, she unlocked the front door and walked in through kind of an arched foyer into a living room. And when she came around the corner, she saw two little girls and an old woman. She screamed and they vanished. So she immediately called her aunt and she said, "Grandma's house is haunted." And her aunt said, "Grandma's house isn't haunted, you're crazy." She called her mom and she said, "Grandma's house is haunted." And her mom said, "Grandma's house is not haunted, you're crazy." A couple days went by and her aunt called her back and said, "I still don't think Grandma's house is haunted, but I was thinking about what you said. And years ago, when your mom and I were little girls, we were with Grandma in the living room, and this woman walked into the living room and screamed at us and then disappeared." And all of a sudden, my client in the present was the ghost in the past, and her mom and sister and grandmother in the past were the ghosts in the present. So what is actually happening?
And what about, I want to ask you this, orbs is something that, like Bigfoot, I completely dismissed, right? I've seen all the pictures, I've heard all the stories, and it never captured my interest until I saw one, right? I've only seen one. And I'm sitting out in this field, and I see this orb about a quarter of a mile away come out from behind these trees, and go from being very small to probably 30, 40 feet around, and it was gray. And it was flat, too. It was like two-dimensional. I'm watching. I rub my eyes, thinking I've got something in my eye. When somebody standing behind me says, "John, is anybody watching that gray orb out there?" And I turned around and said, "You mean this bleep is real?" And I turned around, and then I could hear everybody else around me talking about this orb out there. It changed. It was a paradigm shift, right, for real, in that the majority of orbs that I see in pictures and photos, it's dust, it's whatever. But what I saw that evening was certainly 100% physical and real. And this is another area where I need some explanation as to what I saw. I still don't know.
But I mean, that's the difficulty, right? So because of the way vision works, because of the way the experience works, side example, when we first started sending astronauts into space, they all reported seeing these three-dimensional balls of light inside of the space capsules. And NASA thought for sure that there was some kind of leakage of radiation and they were going to be killed. So they studied it. And what they found out was that once they got up into space, there were cosmic rays hitting their inner eye and creating a three-dimensional hallucination of a ball of light in front of them. Now, each astronaut was seeing a different ball of light because it was a different particle that was hitting each of their eyes. Mm-hmm. But how do you explain that you're not seeing the same thing? If I'm seeing a ball of light and you're seeing a ball of light, we are immediately assuming that it's the same ball of light. So our personal perspective colors the experience as well, because when I'm telling you I see a shadow person and someone says I see a shadow person, when someone says I see a gray ball of light and you say you see a gray ball of light, we all assume we're looking at the same thing when we might be all experiencing something completely different.
Okay, but that doesn't help me at all.
What's great. Also interesting about orbs that no one ever talks about, which I think is fascinating, is that the first kind of actual white paper written on orbs and dust and particulate matter causing orbs was written by Bruce Maccabee, who's a UFO researcher. He wrote a paper about it in 1999 about, with the advent of digital cameras, how people were going to start seeing orbs more commonly. And the reason that Bruce wrote a paper about it was because orbs in film photography had been seen for decades, but they were all thought to be UFOs or aliens. It wasn't until the 90s that orbs started to become ghosts. If you look back in old Fate magazines, if you look back in the old Saucer magazines from the 1940s and 50s, you'll see articles about ships of light. And they are these small white balls of light. And now the other thing is, with film cameras, it's very difficult actually to get an orb to appear because the shutter speed is so much slower than a digital camera and the flash is so much further away. So what were people seeing back in the 40s and 50s that have changed because of the technology and are now being described as ghosts when they were once UFOs and aliens? Well,
and then we have the phenomenon of ball lightning, which goes back in folklore, 1,000 years. And of course the Foo Fighters, which, again, may be a modern phenomenon, but I've always thought that they were the same. But I have also seen with large, groups of people of these craft in the skies that some at pretty low altitude, some at higher altitudes. But I've seen stuff go from ground level up into the atmosphere that clearly aren't metallic or structured, but they're definite physical side of energy, right? And I don't have a way of explaining it, but I've seen it, and I don't know if this is part of orbs and spirits and indigenous cultures, what they have talked about, and we see these today. I think the phenomenon is real. I just don't know what it is.
Yeah, like I said, I've only seen 3 things that I thought were UFO, and the last time it was 3 very bright orb-ish objects in the sky moving very strangely. And after talking to other ufologists for years and years and years, I had an opportunity to try out something which I tell people to do all the time now, which is I stood there watching them. Another person was with me. We were actually traveling through the UP of Michigan. And he said, "Are those UFO?" And I said, "They absolutely are, because I don't know what they are, and they're not moving like anything I know. But we're going to try something, which is let's look at them and tell them that we see them in our minds, telepathically send them a message, ask them if they're UFOs." And he was like, "Why?" And I said, "Because if they are really UFOs, they'll fly over the top of us. They'll fly right over our heads." And he laughed, and we both started to stare and concentrate at these 3 objects way off in the distance. And all 3 of them stopped, turned, and flew directly over our heads.
Now, how do you relate that story to like a Richard Dawkins, right?
You don't.
Right.
He doesn't want to hear it.
Right. Because I've had the same experiences, and I now don't care. Right? I don't care if I tell the stories. I don't care how crazy I sound. It doesn't change the experience. For your friend, had he seen a UFO before? Was this part of, his life, or was this a new event?
No, never. He was driving me to an event, and actually he had told me an hour into the drive, we weren't even really outside of Metro Detroit. He had said, like, "I know we're going to be in the car for a long time. I just don't want anything screwed up to happen." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I just don't want to like have a ghost run out in front of us or see a UFO or anything like that. Like, just don't let anything like that happen." So at 2:00 in the morning, passing through the Upper Peninsula, I looked at him and he goes, "Did you just flick a cigarette out the window?" And I said, "I didn't. Did you?" And he goes, "No." And he kind of huffed and he goes, "Is there something orange flying around in the sky off to the side of us?" And I said, "I think there is." And that was kind of the moment it started.
And how is he now, today?
He runs a UFO convention.
Yeah, I bet he does. One of my first, there's a guy out here in Los Angeles. You may know him. His name is Steve Murillo, and he's done a lot of. He ran MUFON out here in L.A. for 13 years, and a great guy, educated, United States Naval Academy, Marine Corps fighter pilot. Feet on the ground. Great guy, right? Great guy, very smart. And this is like 10 years ago, and he's telling me this story about flashing lasers at these 3 lights in the sky out in the desert one night, and he was skeptical. And then suddenly these things are flashing back, and he said, "Jimmy, I'm serious. I couldn't believe it, and I'm not buying into the story." Years later, Steve and I are with a group of friends. Okay, now I'm with Steve, and we're out in Joshua Tree. And we have this cabin-like cottage thing that we rented out in the middle of the desert. We got about 10, 15, 20 people there. And we're out on the patio. And somebody says, "Wouldn't it be funny if we just saw a UFO?" And John, at that exact moment, out in the middle of the desert, about a quarter mile away, this white, no other way to explain it, ball of light takes off from the desert floor, shoots straight up, didn't curve, straight up and into the stars. And it lasted about 2 seconds. Just pew, into the darkness of the sky, into the stars. And we're all standing there, and Steve's like, I told you, man. I told you. And I was like, what? Now, so that is the craziest thing that I can say out loud. But it happened. And no matter what a Richard Dawkins or a Krause or somebody that's going to tell me that, Tyson or anybody can tell me that wasn't real, it was. It doesn't change the event, and I don't care about talking about it anymore. I don't.
We have to look at the phenomena as it brings. There are natural phenomena, and the universe plays tricks with us. That friend and I driving through Michigan's Upper Peninsula and seeing those UFO. I was dating a woman once, this many years ago. We weren't dating yet. We were at an IHOP, just trying to figure out if we wanted to date each other. And we went outside after we had eaten, and we were walking around holding hands for the first time. And she said, I think I'm going to date you, but I don't want my life to get any weirder. And I said, well, I can't promise anything. And she kind of giggled and laughed. And we had our very first kiss in that moment. And as we kissed, the largest meteor to explode over Michigan exploded over our heads. And she turned back and looked at me and said, is this not weirdness? And I said, I told you I can't promise anything. So, I mean, even natural phenomena, the universe comes to us the way it wants to come to us.
When we're coming down to the bottom of the hour, and I'm not ready to finish. Can I get you to hang on for some overtime?
Sure.
Okay, great. Okay, I feel better now because I've got too many things that that I need to discuss. And so let's go back to everything that we have discussed this evening. And how they may or may not be connected. Because when we're talking about UFOs can appear and disappear in front of our eyes in a second without explanation. It doesn't make any sense how they can be there and they cannot. Bigfoot is there and then disappears. Bigfoot and UFOs. Ghosts appear and disappear. Orbs appear and disappear. All of these things seem to be doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, which is why I tell people to investigate the octopus and not the tentacles. If the universe is coming to us, like I just said, in the ways that it needs to come to us, it will come to us in an infinitesimal amount of forms, whether that some people need to see a Bigfoot, some people need to see a UFO, some people need to see a ghost, some people need to see a goat man, some people need to see a dog man, an elf, a gnome, whatever it is. It comes to you the way that you need it. And trying to break it into its component pieces, you do a disservice to the infinitude of the cosmos.
If Bigfoot, if tomorrow a corpse of Bigfoot is found, mm-hmm. Does that change things, right? If tomorrow we get a secret chamber inside of the Great Pyramid that shows that has papyri in it showing UFOs building the pyramids, right? if some game-changing event comes out, does it actually change things?
I really don't think so. If someone finds a physical Bigfoot body in the forest, then that means that there are physical Bigfoot. But again, I'm open to an infinitude of strangeness, and I am allowed my weirdness to diversify. I think that there are physical Bigfoot, absolutely, maybe, perhaps. But I also think that there are non-physical Bigfoot, absolutely, maybe, perhaps. And alien Bigfoot and time-traveling Bigfoot. The universe doesn't need to only be one thing. It doesn't need to be on or off. This is why this stuff needs to be studied and researched. People can laugh at how silly it may seem to investigate. Let's take just ghosts. But the reality of the situation is, if you make a breakthrough in math, that's great. If you make a breakthrough in environmental sciences, that's great. Physics, it's great. Mechanics, it's great. Architecture, it's great. If you make a breakthrough, if you actually start to figure out what happens to the human being after biological death and where it goes and what happens, you fundamentally change reality for humankind forever. Like, it's massive. Like, we do laugh and have a good time about how weird this stuff is, but it's massively important. I've never understood the first 3 cognitive cavemen who were somewhat self-aware, whether it be 6,000 years ago, according to your belief system, or 500,000 years ago. The first 3 cavemen that were standing around, when one fell down dead, the other 2 should have pointed at him, pointed at each other and said, is that going to happen to me? And in that moment, they should have started researching what reality and existence meant, and they didn't. And that's a kind of crime against all of humanity.
When we come back after the break, I want to talk about magic. And it's something that we haven't touched tonight. And I want to get to that. And I truly feel that those cavemen that you're talking about, that they eventually did figure it out. I think that the ancients, I do believe that the Egyptians had it dialed. They were right there. They understood it, but amnesia at some point set in, and we have chosen to forget about everything that we had acquired in the past. Yeah, for sure. Let's take our break right here. Our guest tonight, John E. L. Tenney. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. You can follow me on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Follow John at John E. L. Tenney right there on Twitter. The links are up in the conversation. We'll be right back after this short break. We're going to do some overtime. I want to talk some magic. Stay with us. Welcome back. Fade to Black. Our guest tonight, John E. L. I almost said J-E-L. Tenney. John E. L. Tenney. And that was a first. We're going into some overtime. John, I've done over probably close to 2,000 shows. Never had that happen before. And
thank you very much.
Yeah. and so I got up, we have digital playback sample players, right? Professional broadcast equipment. And I just hit, number 6 or 5 or whatever, and walked away. I picked up a guitar on the other side of the studio, sitting there strumming, and I heard everything stop. I thought, that's weird. So I put the guitar down. I thought it was going to reset. I don't know. I come over, and I've got lights flashing on the remote control, and I've never seen that before. And I kind of turned around, and I didn't know what to do. And then it started playing again from the beginning. And this is digital gear, right? It doesn't do its own thing. It's repetitive. That was strange, man. You manifested something. I used to freak out, right? When I started doing Ghost and the paranormal programming years ago. Things would go wrong in the studio. Before that, when I was doing sports, nothing ever happened. Nothing.
Usually on paranormal radio shows, when something goes wrong, everybody just says it's the men in black, the government.
I don't even care anymore. I don't even react. It's just like it's part of the gig, which brings me to I want to talk about magic. I think it just happened here in the studio. I brought it up before the break. Somebody said, "Okay, you want to see if it's real? Here you go." When we talk about, there's of course Aleister Crowley, but there is the occultist and the alchemist and the hermeticist and the pursuit of magic that has gone back for thousands of years. And here we are today with magic and different rituals and the ceremony that goes on. What's your take on that? Is it something that is manifested? Is it part of a reality? Is it not?
I mean, I've been a magic practitioner for the majority of my life, I went through all the stages of initiating through different groups and trying to find different magical systems that worked for me, and eventually fell into a very organic and natural. I never thought that magic. I understand that ritual works. I understand that ceremonial magic has its place, but I've come to believe that you do what suits you. I guess, people who are into Crowley would say, it's your will. You do what you want. I don't think that magic appreciates being repetitive. I do want, like I said, I understand the power of ritual. I know there's probably magicians and occultists who get mad at me for saying to just being solitary witch and just do your solitary magic. But for me, that's what works best. And it's all around us. I think people forget that too. I was at the local bar that I go to. This is a few years ago, and there was a guy sitting next to me, and the bartender had told him what I do for a living. And he said, do you really believe in magic? And I said, I don't really believe in it, but I have ideas about it. And he laughed and he goes, it's all junk. None of it works. And I was trying to find a way to reach out to him and start a better dialogue than that. And he was watching a Red Wings hockey game. He had a Red Wings jersey on. And I just simply said to him, have you ever grown your beard out so the Red Wings win a game? And he goes, yeah, of course, man. Every year you got to grow it out. How else are they going to? And I said, no, stop. I go, do you realize you're doing magic right now? And he goes, what do you mean? And I said, do you really think that growing your beard out helps a hockey team win a game? And that's how much it persists. We don't understand that we're doing magical rituals all the time, whether we're having wedding ceremonies or graduation ceremonies. If you watch a giant magical ritual, a magical ritual is you have an elder, you have some acolytes, they have a hollowed piece of ground that has some chalk and weird markings on it, and they're surrounded by people who are either initiated or not, who chant and sing in unison to effect a desired result on that hallowed piece of ground. I haven't described a magical ritual. I described a football game to you. You have a coach and you have players and you have chalk on the ground, the hollowed piece of ground surrounded by people who chant and sing. When you watch a football game, you're watching a magic ritual.
And then there's the other side where there are those out there that will say that Stanley Kubrick and Eyes Wide Shut was a documentary. That there is an elitist Illuminati dark magic group that is running the planet with the assistance of ritual and ceremony. What do we do with that part of it?
There's going to be that part. There are people, whether it's because they are incapable of much earlier in this interview, we were talking about engaging strange phenomena. Engaging strange phenomena, whether they're incapable of coming up with new motives and means and methods. And so they use the ritual, which works over and over again. And they think that they're the only ones doing it because they're, again, incapable of thinking outside their own insulated bubble or sphere. That's part of it, too, because whenever you become a solitary group, that has some difficulties. Again, we talked earlier about engaging the universe and engaging everyone around you, understanding that everyone is different. When you have a single group, whether you want to call them the Illuminati or the wealthiest or the elitists, whatever term you have, that does them a disservice. Their magic might work, yes, but it's not going to be any better or worse than what you can do at home by yourself.
Well, and there's a part of me, and I think with everyone, that are fascinated with it. It's a fun subject to go and explore, and we all say, what if? And then we have that scene of you in Hellier in Detroit, right, where it's almost a definitive court case that is being played out, where the sequence of numbers is suddenly tied into, I think in a factual sense, to Crowley and to the OTO and to magic through symbolism and numbers. And if you want any other clearer proof, I can't give it to you. And it played out in that scene.
I talk about it in that scene in Hellier. I talk about it, though. I talk about, like, Crowley wasn't the one who figured out the numbers. John Dee wasn't the one who figured out the numbers. These ideas and concepts, these magical systems exist, and they have been discovered over and over and over again, and they reveal themselves over and over and over again in a myriad and infinitesimal amount of infinite amount of ways. They are diverse, but they are also very simple. This is that kind of paradoxical language that I was talking about that we have difficulty with as human beings. Crowley did make it very popular, yes, but he didn't discover it. He was building on the backs of metaphysics and psychical research that came before him, and occultists before him. And it goes back all the way to the Egyptians and the Sumerians, and Göbekli Tepe. I mean, it goes all the way back. People understand the triad. They understand the three. Like, this is something that reveals itself over and over again. And in Hellier, it was just one of those moments where they had become so intensely focused on what it should mean, they weren't understanding that it just meant something.
What is the journey, though? Because in Hellier, I think that any of us, you or any member of this audience, could do exactly the same journey that Dana and Greg and Connor and Carl are on and are doing if you choose to follow what is in front of you. And it says to me that somebody out there, I don't know what it is, if it's a spirit or an energy, understands this, because it is real.
Yeah, I think that one of the fascinating points of Hellier and what people are witnessing by watching it is they are watching an initiatory process, but this is not specifically the only initiatory process that goes on. Our lives, our human existence is an initiatory process over and over and over again. We are just seeing it now because of social media and because of movies and the ability of the eye, the kind of desire behind Carl and Connor and Greg and Dana to witness an initiatory experience on a large scale. And because we're witnessing it, we're partaking in it. We're going through our own initiation process. We're going through our own ego death. We're going through the trials, the tribulations. And we're getting to the point where in all initiatory experiences, we're coming out of a cave desiring illumination. And it's really amazing to see that happening, not in one person or in a single journey, but watching thousands of people do it on social media.
Why is it that, and you see it in real time in Hellier, where Greg and Dana and the team are one step away from the edge of the cliff of total darkness? It's a variety of subjects. Why is that always the test or the initiation? Why aren't they chasing unicorns and bunny rabbits and rainbows?
I mean, some people are. It's fascinating because you do see the rise in social media of all. I mean, I'm sure your listeners and you and we've all noticed it. In the past 3 years, or 4 or 5 years maybe, unicorns are everywhere. All of a sudden they showed up on television and in commercials, and they're pooping rainbows and they're eating Skittles and they're everywhere, and they're children's toys. Like, these things do manifest in very strange and crazy ways. And when we say, like, why aren't they? Like, someone is having an initiatory experience with a rabbit. I saw someone on Twitter yesterday who had a beautiful moment with a rabbit in the Scottish hills, and that was their initiatory experience. And it's not that you become ultimately illuminated and understand the mysteries of the universe. It's that kind of hermetic property where you become Hermes. You become the person who can cross from this world into the other world and back. That's really the end goal of initiatory processes.
But, and there's always a but, right?
Sure.
In that sequence of numbers, what wasn't revealed in that the sequence of numbers was a My Magic Pony commercial from 1995. Right?
Right. What happened was, and I mean, this is just my experience. Again, I told you kind of when we were talking about Hellier earlier, I have them keep me out of the loop for a reason. But I feel personally, one of the reasons that they came to me is because they were literally getting stuck in a cave. And the numbers, through what they had and how they came to understand them with or without my help, allowed them to leave that cave and continue on their journey.
Okay. This is a yes or no question. Could those, especially in that last sequence in Detroit, could those clues have taken them to My Magic Pony if they chose it to? Is that an option, right? Is there a fork in the road?
I mean, if that's what they needed, that's where it would have gone.
Right.
I also, and again, I haven't discussed this with Greg and Dana. They've been pretty busy since it came out. But, one of the things that's crazy about the numbers and the way it reveals itself, and I talked earlier about like the triad, is that initiatory processes are usually 3 steps. Whether you're a Freemason and you have to go through your first 3 initiatory degrees, or whether it's school being, kindergarten, middle school, and high school, whether it's being young, middle-aged, and old, like there are these 3 processes. And the only thing, again, I haven't talked about this with Greg and Dana, is that this is the second version of Hellier. This is the middle of the initiation. Like there has to be a third. That's the completion of the initiation.
Yeah, I see the hero's journey playing out here for sure. It's interesting how Joseph Campbell was brought up in this series, because you definitely, with season 1, have the setup, right? They leave home. In the middle section, the magic happens, and they get their tools. There's a closure to this in season 3, and I'm not sure where it's all leading. And the other part about it is, in this particular hero's journey, it seems like there has been a whole series of choices of light and dark. And I go back to going to the light or going to the dark, and I go back and look at the 3 balloons and the significance of them, and especially the last one. But to have 3 balloons like that appear the way that they did in this series, and the last one obviously being a blue star and the star sapphire aspect of this, that's a very interesting twist in this entire thing, where you wouldn't expect the significance of that 3rd balloon being what it is and its place in this journey, right?
Right. And like I said, the initiatory process, whether it's ceremonial, ritual, PO, Freemasonic, Thelemite, initiatory processes, you have a blind entrance, you have a journey, and then you have illumination. Those are the steps. And Hellier 2 is the journey.
The 3rd balloon, I wanted to ask you about this because you guys discussed this, and that's the Detroit hotel room was just a mind-blowing, So many things were revealed there. But if you go back to the 3rd balloon, where and I think it's significant, if they hadn't have found it, then the last scene in the Detroit hotel room with you doesn't exist, right?
Yeah, but it's interesting because, again, people are almost watching this in real time because that happened in September, and I feel like the universe gives you options, because you're talking about the 3 balloons now. What happens, though, is there's actually 4 balloons. It was setting itself up in case they didn't reveal. I mean, I don't know if that comes completely through it in Hellier too, but Tyler finds a balloon at the location that he goes to. And so you have a balloon that is discovered. You have one from Greg's friends, you have Tyler's, and you have one that's down on a tree. It's setting itself up, making sure that it gets recognized because it needs to lead them on a specific path, and it needs them to find it. If they wouldn't have me, it would have led them to me in a different direction, or it would have led the numbers in a different direction to where they're at now. They would have found another way out because there isn't only one way. There are a multitude of ways.
Is there, I want to make the, literally, John, have 2 minutes left. If Greg, I love synchronicities, if Greg would have just left the balloon at the base of the tree, right, and videoed that and walked away, and I just saw another balloon, that's crazy enough. But the fact that it went to the next stage and it was unfolded and it was revealed as a blue star, and how that will play out in season 3, like it did, that whole star sapphire thing would not have happened. And it's a very, very heavy synchronicity if we look at it in those terms. Can I tell you
something? I don't know if Greg has ever revealed this, and I don't really want to reveal secrets or stuff, but since we're talking about it, I think it's pertinent to this. When Greg found that balloon, it has a UPC code, an ISBN number, where you can scan it from a store if you want to order more of them on that, right on the tag. Greg looked up that balloon on Google, and it's a part of a series of star balloons. You have a red balloon, a green balloon, a yellow balloon, an orange balloon. Do you know what color that balloon is?
It was blue.
Its actual name is sapphire blue.
Yes. Man,
every other balloon is orange, red, yellow, green. That one is sapphire blue.
I love it. I for everybody that's listening, I'm not spoiling anything. When you get to the complexity of the Detroit hotel room and everything that comes out in what seemingly is rapid fire, by the way. It's one thing after another. The balloon and its significance, well, it's how it plays out. And you just have to go and watch Hellier.
It's magic.
It is magic. It is magic. John, where are you speaking next? What are you doing?
I usually take December and January off. I have an event in January, I believe sometime in the 20th in Wisconsin. All of my events can be found on weirdlectures.com/events. Yep,
and it's a great website, everybody. Lots of reading, lots of stuff there. And, John, I look forward to the next time when you are on with us, and we'll take one specific subject and go deep. Thank you so much.
Jimmy, thanks for having me. I loved it.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. John E. L. Tenney, weirdlectures.com, realmoftheweird.com. Both of the links are over at jimmychurchradio.com. It's easy to get to. You can also follow John right there on Twitter, John E. L. Tenney. We've got all of the links up in the hashtag F2B and hashtag F2BQ. And, of course, Rita's got it up in her feed as well. Tomorrow night, Matthew Mornian is here. Another first-time guest. And one of the things that I enjoy doing here on Fade to Black, and I talk about it all the time, and I really mean this, first-time guests are my favorite thing to do. And here this week, tonight with John E. L. Tenney, tomorrow night, Matthew Mornian, and then we're going to do the same thing on Wednesday night. Thursday night is our 6th anniversary. And on Friday, we will start our 7th year here on Fade to Black. Absolutely incredible. This is the best audience in the world, and I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us each night of the week. With that, I am going to get out of here. We went pole to pole tonight with John E. L. Tenney. Fade to Black's executive producer is Rita Camurian. Show is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Dennis, and Bob Announcers are Steve Harder, Gene Vito, and Mark D. Kovar. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music is Doug Aldrich. Intro, Spaceboy, spaceboymusic.com. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network, and syndication is KGRA, The Planet. This broadcast owned and copyrighted 2019 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Tomorrow night, right here, Matthew Mornian. Until then, I want everybody to be safe. Go Beckley Teppy.